para pedir a todos os presentes para colocarem os telemóveis em silêncio, por favor. Muito obrigado. Dois minutos. Um minuto.
Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you for this session on collaborative partnerships and networks on behalf of cultural democracy. I'm Ana Carvalho. I have Paul Pires from the National Plan of Arts, and that is what we're going to talk a little bit about. Before that, let me just say that if you want to raise some questions, you can do so throughout this talk, and then at the end we will have a short space of time to answer some of these questions. Paulo, this
Uma feliz parceria, penso que é
National Plan of Arts, I think, is a fortunate partnership between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Culture, which was launched in 2019 with a strategic line of thinking over a 10-year period. For those who don't know the plan yet, and since we are going into the second year of activities already, what is the mission of the National Art Plan, and what is the balance that we can have at this stage? Good afternoon, Anna, and good afternoon to everyone who is listening. Let me thank you, Anna, Clara, the whole team that organized this meeting. Well, the mission corresponds to the title and the topic of today's conversation of ours and this meeting. The plan has the origin of those two ministries with the tutelage to create networks, points and partnerships. I think it would be the Pontifice would be a rightful name. The cultural institutions and the schools, the educational institutions to go towards this meeting, and then the other institutions that all this is related to, the municipalities, universities, the companies, and the work that they can carry out in the sense of sponsoring and financing other artistic activities. This plan comes about with the desire to make more accessible culture, arts, heritage to citizens, particularly in school-going citizens. I would say that it doesn't do it simply because it looks good to know more about culture, but because it believes in the transforming power of arts and heritage in life. In other words, arts are not just for good looks, as Sophia Melbourne says, but to transform reality and transform life. In fact, we believe in that famous sentence from T.S. Eliot, life is worth living. And this means the knowledge that everybody needs, which is the heritage, material and immaterial, that the construction, the continuous construction of humanity and its identity, which are the arts, both from the past and the contemporary ones as well, but also popular culture and mass culture, and to understand and look at them with a critical vision. So the plan's mission is to be able to, in fact, to comply with the Constitution, which is make incarnated and visible and experienceable the right to culture in enjoying the culture, but also cultural creation, which is that specificity of our culture that we'd like, of our constitution that we'd like to highlight. In other words, culture is the right not only to be spectators and enjoy it, in other words, accessing it, but also in the sense of being able to be cultural producers. The great vision, the vision of the plan and what we want in 10 years' time, at the time when we are dispensable, we can close. The great goal, in fact, is that accountability by everyone, by the cultural horizon of everybody. So with that sense, the plan is aimed at everybody, for everybody, like the notion of the old paradigm of democratization, the notion of culture for everyone. But today we understand that culture must be seen in a plural way. We need to understand culture as multiple, so culture in plurality must be done by everyone and everyone's participation and citizens. Well, what about the balance of these 2 years, in which one of them was experienced within the pandemic and totally unexpected, is positive, even if our wish was that we already had even better results. But with a part of the important work that the plan must carry out is this, precisely to create a structure, in other words, in the shadows. In other words, it's not under the spotlight. And in that backstage work to create a network, to present the plan, to let people know, show their measures to the different players in this systemic perspective that we were talking about, is to work with schools. It's not always visible. It is to train as well and prepare the training and give teachers the training as well. In other words, the work of the plan was possible to be carried out and move forward, even in these difficult conditions. We advanced, and we had to run regarding some measures that we had thought of for the first 5 years. We had to present them in a more immediate way. For example, digital educational courses. So in other words, a page with educational resources made available so that teachers, students, parents could make use of it during the pandemic, especially when schools closed after March. We created this page with 300 courses already today, when we were expecting to do it with much more time. And in some cases we had to sprint, in some cases postpone some of the measures that we had thought of for 2021 or 22. Would make sense only later on. For example, something that has much more visibility. needs to be worked on very carefully and with many partners, which is the creation of a biennial to work on issues of art, infancy and the youth, and which was in our strategic plan to start in 22. We'll be starting in 23 now. For example, partners, museums, theaters had to change their programming because of the success of postponements. We also had to adapt. So there are measures that moved forward. For example, training actions for teachers online, what we call the Academia of National Art Plan, with training proposals that cross art with culture and different disciplines, which is to go to school not only with the disciplinary point of view, as if culture is something outside life, or of our existence, but rather to show that culture, arts and heritage are an integrating part of life. In this case of the educational community, the different disciplines. So teacher philosophy or mathematics is an agent of culture, just like the plastic arts teacher or visual arts or music. We did not, in this strategic plan, we didn't want to create a discipline apart from the others. We really want all of them to be a vehicle of culture. So, for example, training for teachers starts from that point of view by cross-linking disciplines so that in training itself, different teachers could understand how they can work with content that is cultural. So in the same way, the educational resources that I mentioned earlier on, they also have that transdisciplinary perspective. The program for schools, we call it to in-discipline school, not the teachers, but the school. So in other words, by saying in-discipline, the school is based on a cultural project of the school. That in terms of balance, we started in 2019 with 60 school groups, and even in a pandemic, and much to our rejoice and happiness, it was unexpected. We more than duplicated going into the second year, and at the moment we're about 150 school groups working with us, obviously with the difficulties that we all understand and we all feel. The great purpose of this plan is to break down barriers, this wall of disciplines between cultural institutions, and not only between schools and cultural institutions. So by institutionalizing this, we also create walls and barriers, and we're happy with the territory which is ours. And the great purpose is to break down these barriers. With the pandemic, we felt that the walls came up again, the doors closed, fear from the other coming from outside was natural. So one of the steps that we wanted to take this year was to highlight that if in a first moment the response was digital, and digital is fundamental for museums, theaters, cultural institutions, for schools, we have to work on that and continue working on that and not going back on that. One of the problems that we felt on our page of educational resources was to discover good digital courses in Portuguese, because our institutions were not very used to working with the digital aspects with autonomy. It was only a communication course and not with its own autonomy. Whereas we had and made available on our page with that intuition to get to let people know very different practices regarding digital resources that many institutions had been working on for many years and made available for some time now. So breaking down these walls and barriers was one of the actions that we felt was necessary this year as well. And then one step towards the digital in the beginning of this school year with the cultural institutions, with the difficulty of the museums and theaters getting to the schools and schools getting to the theaters. We had to launch a manifest, and we built a manifest with our partners of theaters, museums, the network, libraries, the Portuguese network of museums, the National Reading Plan, cinema, aesthetics and artistic plan. So we created all these partners from the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, a manifest which is precisely called something that we stole from our poet. So this is the day and this is the time. So even with the pandemic, and maybe because of that, we have to give a clear sign on the importance of arts and the heritage of life in the educational community, and that it was safe to continue doing this work with schools, as we wish that now, with the opening of schools, can be theatres and museums as well, can also be continued. The artists, the mediators going to schools and schools going to the cultural spaces. In other words, that these walls do not come up again and do not stay up. We understand that during pandemic the conditions are different. We have to work with them, but we cannot go back regarding the role of the cultural institutions in life, of the educational community and the educational community in cultural institutions. If you want another formula to understand the work of the plan and what it has been, and I've already tried to explain that it's done in many fronts and from many different points of view for the same ends. But there's one thing that I like using to make this work be known. Our great desire is to transform cultural institutions in educational territory, to show that they are educational territory. We don't even need to transform them, we just need to show that they are educational territory. And for that, we also need cultural institutions to understand that impact on education and socially as well that they can have. And on the other hand, show that schools are a cultural center, and there are many places, and they can always be. That's why we can present them as such and produce. In other words, they're cultural producers. Schools are producers of culture. The students, the teachers are producers of culture, and even in some places of the territory, we feel that. It is the school's cultural production that also allows it to be fed, to make theatre, music accessible, even plastic arts to those citizens. So this understanding, or rather this subversion of what we have inside draws often cultural institutions and educational ones, to subvert these spaces, to understand this awareness of an expanded education in the case of museums, or to transform the school into a cultural territory in an open way is one of the plan's great goals. When we talk about cultural policies, we talk about the democratization of a culture. You have already mentioned this, which is implicit in a way and has been consigned in our Portuguese constitution, but we also speak about cultural democracy. These approaches can be complementary, they coexist. In what way does the National Arts Plan look at the questions of cultural democracy, how it tries to incorporate them besides the democratization in terms of promoting access? Well, as you've just indicated, for many, many years, and this is how it started actually, the goal and the word used, the paradigm we used was democratization. In other words, there was a set of chosen people and people who knew in the know and things that others should have access to, in other words, democratize culture. Very often by associating this idea of democratization of culture to take culture to the people, this idea of the public as if public were only one homogeneous entity. This idea of democratization was put into question from the 80s with this awareness of the importance of the voice of everyone for the culture of everyone. If giving access to the great monuments of the history of humanity, the cultural ones, and this is how it was seen, the principle of democratization with the French Ministry of Culture, Marowitz, and afterwards, this idea of making the great works accessible. We cannot forget either that this can be a kind of symbolic violence regarding the others that are not connected to or do not understand why. This idea of cultural democracy complements the other one. It doesn't have to substitute, as you said, Anna, but it complements the other one with the valuing of culture that already exists. For us, it's very important to highlight that aspect. In other words, to value the different voices, the different kinds of culture, the different artistic manifestations, and not starting from the principle that there's no culture in the territory. Well, we hear that very often. We need to take culture to the territory as if culture does not exist there already. No, we have to value what already exists to understand what is lacking and where we are failing. But the starting point must be valuing of what exists, of the people with what they know and what they have. If we do true cultural democracy, in other words, to empower, in other words, show that everyone is capable of being accountable for the culture of their square kilometer and the cultural horizon where they are. For example, a very practical way. The cultural projects at school that I was saying we are developing with 150 school groups from north to the south of the country, on the islands, and even in Mozambique and in Timor. These cultural projects at school are not given by the National Arts Plan. In other words, the cultural project at school is not pre-manufactured outside the territory. No, it has to come from a desire, a problem, a question, a topic that in that territory, at that school, is chosen as essential and priority. Like any other project, the identification of the desire, the topic, the problem is done there, so that in a second step we can ask how can culture and the arts, the heritage can help us to understand this issue, this problem, this topic. So right there we have this notion of cultural democracy in action, which means we are not spreading throughout the territory a set of works that we deem necessary to be known. There is work in which we can do that, but this paradigm of democratization does not to be overcome in an absolute way. We know that there's a set of works that are fundamental to know, related to the history of Portuguese art or the history of Portugal or Portuguese heritage. We have this notion that we want to maintain, but we also have that awareness of heritage of proximity, valuing that heritage that can be industrial sometimes or urban, or in other cases rural, and not decrease the value of that heritage that exists there, or the non-constructed heritage, but immaterial, of local traditions, festivities, of the know-how. And that should be the starting point to open up a culture that is universal, cosmopolitan, that is not only the one that exists there already. So I think there is an equilibrium game between what is necessary, that notion of democratization and the paradigm of democratization in which some choose what others should enjoy, to another one in which you are aware that all cultural producers, and we should all be. So we need to empower so that everyone can take the floor and have their word, and be accountable and take one step forward for everybody's culture. Thank you very much. To collaborate and in discipline, or words that you use a lot. We saw that in the plan. In your opinion, are there words that we can bring to the museums? Do you consider that there are attributes that museums can also have? And then another question, and we're coming to the end of our time. Time flies. what is the place of museums in the National Arts Plan. I'm thinking about the contract and social impact, which is one of the measures foreseen in the plan. Do you want to talk to us about the place of museums, Canelfa? Yes, a fundamental place in this strategy, not only through what they have in their possession, in other words, the works and the heritage that is there, but through the possibility of making it accessible. And there I'll start at the end with the proposal of a commitment, a contract of educational impact and social as well of cultural institutions. One of the measures that we propose with this awareness that it's not worth making a project like this and a plan like this only thinking about school as if the school is a closed space. So rather, we need to understand that we need the whole village to educate a child. We understand the importance of cultural institutions, now talking about the museums specifically.
We realize that the mission of a museum, which is already at the level of words, documents, and also having social impact, that has to be higher as well, to think long run and strategically. One of the proposals is for this contract to be a way to consider social impact and educating impact. The purpose has to be an education place, considering also democracy, active participation, and also everything that people can bring to museums. Museums to be open up to that, to multiple perspectives. This desire to be an inclusive place with multiple viewpoints, with a capacity to bring inside the needs and the desires and the issues of schools. We are interested in having, in this connection with these projects with the schools, the presence of the museum director in the school, at the school, and to be involved in the community with which the school relates. In that sense, the museum, the theater, cultural associations, and so forth, or the resident artists as well. And he can also make a bridge between the museum and the school itself to have a connection between the cultural institution and the education institution. In this contract, what we aim is for the government and the institution, the museum, be able to be committed, on the one hand, to find the necessary resources for the fulfillment of the mission and to operate the measures and the goals subject to being evaluated. And we have mentioned the importance of this evaluation and how we want the impact, starting with the studies of the publics the museum has or not have, the knowledge of this public, the knowledge of the community in which the museum is. The museum to be part of the community is key. The cultural institution to be understood as a community hub, open up to the community, having a strategy. Whom do we want to reach and how? Because to reach everyone means reaching no one. To privilege, for instance, youngsters from secondary schools or universities. Which measures are we going to put in place to reach them? This idea to have a contract of impact, of social impact of cultural institutions is not to let on the air a good intention. Good intentions are not enough. We need to create goals, strategies, and also programs for these intentions to be able to be fulfilled. And in this sense, the museums have a key role in this strategy of the plan. The plan can only be put in place, or this access to arts, to heritage and culture can only take place if this connection between the museums and the community, this awareness of this community work that the museum does, following several models and territories, including the digital one, is essential. But this requires to understand that we have to choose in terms of strategy who is our target public, how we are going to reach them, and what do we need for it to remain. On the one hand, the museums have an essential work to be done in order to bridge with the schools, and the schools can also learn a lot with museums and with what is the work of the museum. The museum pedagogy, there is a lesson to be learned, which then at school, in the education, we are contributing to that. But this would be a different talk. Well, yes, we don't have time to have this long conversation. We have to have time to answer some of the questions put forward by the audience. So we are going to close very well, thinking about the museum strategically and in connection with the arts project. Thank you very much for sharing that. And from our side, we say goodbye. We will continue to speak about networks. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good work. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you at the National Ajuda Palace, this international congress or symposium that in this case we are going to speak about networks and partnerships in action. It is a pleasure to me that during pandemic times we have chosen this solution, a solution that allows us in a more comprehensive way to reach several publics. And I would like to invite you all in the near future to visit the National Ajuda Palace. So in this panel that begins now, the theme is networks and partnerships in action from the proximity territories to global territories. I'm going to have several speakers in our discussion period, which it's an honor to me to moderate. And I will start with Hugo Seabra, the manager of Parties Initiative. Hugo Martinez, I apologize. Hugo Martinez de Seabra project manager in the Gulbenkian program Sustainable Development. He has been in charge in 2 domains, practical art, artistic practices and migrations. In this capacity, he is going to speak about artistic practices for social transformation. So I invite you to take the floor for a while to speak with us about this subject.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an enormous pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the Direction General of Cultural Heritage for the invitation to the Gulbenkian Foundation to be here to present our point of view for social inclusion. Well, I have a needed to explain previously that Gulbenkian is an institution that is headquartered in Lisbon, that has 4 purposes established in its foundation statutes: work in charity, art, education, and science. These are the 4 big areas in terms of statutes created by the Gulbenkian Foundation, following Carlos Sartes Gulbenkian's wishes. It started its activity in 1956 for these past few years, between 2007 and 2013, through the intervention led by engineer Luis Aval and myself collaborating. We started testing some projects in territories where the population was more present from the several origins, but the children's home. We started rehearsing some projects related to music, dance, and understand the enormous potential that artistic practices had in social transformation by working with different public, as we just heard a few minutes ago, in this attempt to go to the communities, what they have already, and trying to prove on that, and this crossover of opportunities in that sense. Through this experimental work, we started getting some words like democratization, co-creation, participation, quality, and the civic role of art and culture. By art and culture itself, and it is within this framework that we started the Parties Initiative at Gulbenkian, which aims to promote democratization and access and the participation by everyone in creation and enjoyment of culture and artistic aspects, namely people and the more vulnerable groups in society, and in the cross-linking of everybody in the community through the support of participative art that gathers professional, non-professional artists in shared process of learning, reflection, and construction of artistic proposals by developing individual competencies within the communities themselves. In fact, to give space to different conditions and space in society, the different voices that comprise society, to have the opportunity to express and to be heard by seeking quality of opportunities, civic participation, creation of new responses for global challenges that we have before us. In a way, the great goal implies practically comparing this big topic that we have before us today, and maybe when there were servants 2-3 decades ago, when they were created, maybe not starting these services because they didn't see how they could do that. Now it's unthinkable to start this kind of project without the educational resources, and through Gulbenkian, this implies in what kind of alignment we heard about the cultural institutions as having social responsibility, and to think that any cultural institution in its annual programming The interpreters apologize, but it's extremely difficult to follow with this quality of audio. We're going to try and do our best and not consider this that is done only occasionally. And that is our great goal, that in the mid and long term we wanted to accomplish. How do we work? On the one hand, the most well-known dimension, which are subsidies for pilot projects, but as a complement, we have many other dimensions. For example, empowering the dynamization of structures, cultural and social ones, and in parallel the construction of follow-up models and assessment, and it's permanent revisiting, always in a participated perspective. So the financier does not impose anything. In other words, we build with the structures that we're working with them. Because we're here in a panel that's talking about networks, that's also one of our priorities, the dynamization and dissemination of knowledge, as well as production involvement of the academia, and also the creation of national and international networks. Ideally within our foundation universe, but not only. In terms of this program, not going to explain it in detail, but since 2013 we opened up the first tender. We are supporting 4 cohorts of projects. We have partnerships with the La Caixa Foundation from Spain. We have 16 projects underway through that partnership and 15 projects being developed. These projects are ending now in 2021, and we hope we can extend them a little bit further. So I'm going to speed up to try and comply with the time that I was given. So we feel that the party's initiative is aligned with the 4 statutory means and ends of the foundation. We are trying to fulfill the gap in terms of available support at the national level for projects with these characteristics, and much more. The great goal is to give space for innovation, creativity, and mistakes. If they're there, we don't want to bet on easy things and those things that always give us a lot of success. We want to be present in projects of high risk and innovative, and always in partnership to value our partners, and not by giving priority the dimension of the product, but by balancing the importance of the process. The process is absolutely central in these projects, and the results are important, but the project is what we value. And therefore, we finance projects between 24 and 36 months, and not only the faster ones. Some figures without going into detail. Let me just select the total. We've already analyzed for investment 4 million euros for subsidies since 2014. 64 subsidies have been attributed. We have 31 projects at this moment underway. We have 807 partner organizations, and the valuing of these partnerships is fundamental. We do not want to be positioned as the sole financier. We want to establish strong partnerships that will allow to consider the viability of the projects after Gulbenkian leaves. I'll make these data available. You can see them again regarding some of these figures here. There is a very strong dimension in terms of the production of knowledge. So we valued the production of these kind of interpretations. And if these 3 examples are available online, free of charge, freely, right, with the articulation with the Gulbenkian Foundation. This also exists in English. Any of these three contents are available online and can be worked with people from theatre and teaching theatre. They're all available online freely, as I have said, because that's our perspective. And because we wanted to share some pictures as well of projects that we have carried out and we have supported, and that touch upon these dynamics that I've just mentioned, be it in visual arts or fiction and documentaries, the dimension of photography, and also talking about the model and political spaces to highlight the photography. And this is part of the photo exhibition. We see photos and we share photos with the blind circus projects to cross cultures, interests, perspectives. All this is part of our support to group theatre refugees. Further on, people from communities from further abroad to give them visibility and their suffering. The dimension of music, several projects. These are projects are very much present in the party's projects. We held a project for deaf people and a new creation and sign language for music even. And one of the ex-libris of the project, the party's project, opera at prisons, with the participation of the prison staff. For example, top left, you can see the director of the prison participated actively in the rehearsals, and also some youngsters that also helped the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation. And as we can see, bottom right, we can see an example who had the opportunity of working with us for 2 years. In parallel, these initiatives outside the foundation, we also have an internal challenge. The Gulbenkian Foundation has good areas, good collections, its central services with all its knowledge. It was developed internally, and how can these units escape the cycles and that we heard a few minutes ago, to tear down walls, etc. In that context, I'll give some detail regarding what the partnerships are and that we have developed over the last few years with extraordinary work by the museums and things as simple as guided visits and a set of members of a certain project up to more elaborate situations like empowering sessions that are specific, alignment of joint actions, exhibitions, things that I mentioned earlier on, photos that can be enjoyed by blind people, educational services in the sense of giving classes, and especially blind students from school, and other visits with specific activities. So welcoming in a specific way, joint organization of training workshops. We have had many internal partnerships with this perspective, and who knows, to identify, as I'll finish my talk, new profiles for public for the museum. Let me end off with a specific example from the party's action, but also with the Gulbenkian Museum. An Iranian artist, and through the party's project spoke with the museums, and he became an excellent mediator regarding the founders' collection and Islamic art. And in some spaces there is a very strong collaboration between this theater group in the parties project and the Islamic collection through educational partnerships and others, among which the foundation sees itself and can give us a perspective that is different on what those works of art represent. Thank you very much. I apologize. I was trying to stick to my 15 minutes. Here is my contact, and I'm available and at your disposal for any questions you may have. Thank you for your interesting presentation. We will have a moment later on for debate. We are going to have a slight change in the lineup of two presentations, and we're going to move directly to Molly Fennan. So we are within our group, Networks and Partnerships in Action. We're talking about proximity, networks, and global territories. So Molly Fennan, who's the CEO of the Museum for the United Nations, live, a global museum, and a museum that wants to build a world with more hope. Molly Fennan is a former director of Global in the Smithsonian Institution and conceived several programs of development internationally and has worked in the area between development and culture in more than 40 countries. What she's going to bring us is precisely a presentation on the Global Museum, experimental approaches, and global partnerships. Molly, you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. And now we get to know each other as human beings who sometimes have problems with technology. I'm really delighted to be here with you to talk to you about my new project after leaving the Smithsonian just 2 years ago to establish a museum for, not about, for the United Nations UN Live. And why I'm particularly passionate about being here amongst all of you is that I know about the power of museums, and we know that the only way we're going to solve the challenges of the time that we are already all living in is by acting together. Because the truth is that we can no longer stay in our comfort zone as museums, that the challenges we face as a world are so high and the time frame is so short that we need to start taking some serious risks and realizing that business as usual is no longer an option. And so that's why 2 years ago, I moved from a job I loved and an institution I loved with my 3 daughters and my whole family all the way over to Copenhagen to build this, knowing that we really needed to do something different as an entire sector. So what I hope to talk to you about is what we're thinking, but it's with the spirit of radical generosity and radical humility that we hope to learn from many of you. So please be in touch, as well as share everything and everything we're doing with all of you. So just really quickly, the mission for the Museum for the United Nations is to connect people everywhere to the work and values of the United Nations by dramatically increasing the number of people who work to achieve its goals. So our focus is on action. Our focus is on getting billions of people to start taking action in their everyday lives to make the world a more hopeful, optimistic, and habitable place for our generation and for future generations. We have the mandate of the United Nations at the time when UN Live was established. All 4 then living, former and current Undersecretary or Secretary Generals of the United Nations fully backed the idea of UN Live as a new kind of institution, an institution that said, if we as the world are going to realize the Sustainable Development Goals, we must have a wholly new kind of institution that's focused on bringing the many people, especially young people, into the conversations and really focuses on the power of individuals. And I was super inspired by that notion because I actually don't come from a museum background. Before I joined the Smithsonian, I spent my career working in international development, biodiversity conservation, human rights in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. And so the idea of doing that, of actually pushing that agenda through a museum seemed like a dream job. So I jumped on the bandwagon. But a face that I keep framed on my desk that I think is really important is this one. And I can't see any of your faces, but I'm sure some of you remember this face. This is the face that Greta made in the last climate summit, so the year before last in New York City when she visited, when she said, "How dare you? How dare you?" And so I would urge all of us to remember this face when we wonder whether we should change things that we're doing, when we wonder how long it might take, when we wonder if, for us to even think about how dare us even wonder whether or not we should change, that we need to respond to this sense of urgency of the future generations of young people who are going to inherit the earth, because we as museums have the power to shine a light on young people and on everyday people the world over, because we know as museums that work all over the world that great ideas and brilliance can come from everywhere and from everyone. And so that's my opening statement for you. So what are we trying to do at the Museum for the United Nations? Well, we know that the last thing the world needs in this era of business is no longer usual is a museum about the United Nations in Copenhagen, which very few people would visit. So what we're trying to do is to create an institution that can start to fill the gaps to help all museums and cultural sector organizations respond to that "how dare you" notion, to help all museums move into a more active and more effective way. And we're taking some big risks, and I hope to do so in partnership with many of you. One thing that we're doing is we're following the science. So rather than having an audience research team, what we're really focused on now is what does behavioral change science, what does neurobiology, what are all of these fields of science of how we change our minds indicate is the best way to actually solve these problems. And increasingly, some of the world's leading behavior change scientists that we're now working with are saying, and I'm including one quote of one scientist here, just as an indication, that culture, in particular mass culture, might not only be the most untapped tool in our arsenal, but perhaps the most powerful. And so the strategy of UN Live is to unleash the power of culture to inspire local action everywhere and drive global change. We know that local action is where it's at. There's no such thing as a truly global organization. To be truly global, you have to be local everywhere. But we're integrating that local with a global weaving and doing it through culture. But how are we going to do that at scale? So we're working with behavior change science as our foundation, and we are happy and eager to share what we're learning works and what we're learning doesn't with any and all of you that want to be part of this. We're experimenting with the idea of mass culture as the medium of going out to people where they are, how they enjoy things, because that's what science indicates might be the most powerful. We're working with global partners that already have massive reach, and I'll tell you a few stories so you can get a sense of what that really feels like. And this is really an invitation for all of you who are global partners with massive reach to join on this journey with us and for us to learn from you. We're not reinventing the wheel. So I really want to talk to you about a digital engagement platform that we're now helping to lead that I really think the museum sector can and should join. And we're asking people to come together on this journey with us as a creative partner. So just a couple quick stories. In Colombia, we began our question about how do we engage people towards action on a more sustainable city here, specifically in Bogota. You can read about this in the Guardian article that was written a few weeks ago in the Guardian newspaper about this. The specialists in Colombia, and by specialists, I mean the Colombians, and specifically the people who lived in Bogota, we gathered a group of chefs, of scientists, of engineers, of Catholic priests, of rock stars, of young people, and we said, what would move people to care here specifically? And the answer was a resounding two things. nostalgia for the biodiversity of the Amazon, so a missing of the biodiversity of the Amazon, and a love of music. And out of that has come this incredible collaboration where we, even during Corona time, have asked people to record the sounds of biodiversity. And we're partnering up with some of Latin America's most popular musicians, including some of the most popular rock bands. And we just launched a series of our first 4 albums together with these musicians of recording the sounds of biodiversity and letting people feel the rhythm of biodiversity, whether at their home right now in coronavirus or eventually on a dance floor somewhere. We're now saying, well, where else can we take this experiment? So this fall, across all 6,000 churches of another partner with a massive infrastructure, the Catholic Church, across all 6,000 churches in Colombia, we're piloting the first ever eco mass, where we're saying these same rock musicians, these same musicians and recorders of biodiversity and individuals record the sounds of biodiversity. Musicians who don't traditionally work with the church are going to work with people who do traditionally work with the church. And we're going to rewrite the sounds of what you hear in a day of mass, in a day of worship in Colombia across all 6,000 churches on the same day to experiment with the first ecological mass for the Catholic Church as an idea of reaching the approximately 45 million Colombians in Colombia who worship Catholic. So we're experimenting with radical partnerships with the Catholic Church. The idea is we should be a museum that never expects people to come to us. We go where they are, whether it's a dance club in Bogota or the Catholic Church in Bogota. But now let me take you to another geography where we've been experimenting. In India, obviously, as in all of our countries, climate change is a major problem. In India, it ranges the effects of climate change from increasing disease vectors to issues of river pollution and river rising to air pollution, et cetera. So how are we doing this? We're launching the first ever climate thriller on Bollywood using the star power of an actor in Bollywood whose name is Amitabh Bachchan. I've been told that from an American's point of view, the best way to imagine the star power of Amitabh Bachchan is to imagine Brad Pitt, George Clooney, and Sean Penn all rolled up into one. So Amitabh is going to star in this climate thriller that everybody is going to watch on their telephones on Flipkart, which is kind of the Amazon of India, where people consume. So while they're on the commuter train into Mumbai on their daily morning commute, they'll watch a climate thriller on Bollywood, which will be embedded with UN science and through gamification will lead them to the actions that they can take in their everyday life to address climate. So again, the power of mass culture, the power of Bollywood, the science of behavior change and the science of climate action, leading people to action. We've just actually been selected by Ólafur Eliasson to be the permanent host institution of Earth Speaker, which I hope actually many of you as museums have already begun to experiment with, because I know that Earth Speaker was part of what Germany brought when they assumed the leadership of the European Union. Earth Speaker is a platform that collects children's voices and their demands and their hopes and their fears for the environment in a playful way, but forces the grown-ups to listen. And so we're experimenting with Earth Speaker, and we would welcome lots of ways to work with you on how to experiment with Earth Speaker to raise the voices of children up, to create a demand for change that we all need to see. And since we all have such strong relationships with schools in our local communities, with families in our local communities, this could be a very nice way of collaborating with you. This isn't the first talk I've given. And often the talks I give focus on the fact that really the time is now. We have to be agents of change. So I'm going to just end my time by inviting you to jump on a journey with us. I know from my time at the Smithsonian Institution that it's often hard for museums to wonder, where does my education mission begin and end? And when and whether should I move into advocacy, much less activism? We know that's a very difficult thing for many museums. I understand it personally from the institution that I came from. And so what we've done is, rather than say all of us should do it alone, is to say none of us should do it alone. We should all do it together, and we should do it in a way that harnesses the strengths of ourselves as institutions and brings them to other organizations. So we've joined the leadership group of an organization called Count Us In, which is spearheaded by Christiana Figueres, the architect of the Climate Paris Agreement, on a plan called Count Us In, which is a way, together with Global Optimism, which is Christiana Figueres' organization, UN Environment, TED, and us, to actually say, we're going to pull together the actions of people, no matter where they are and how they find us. And later, when I don't have such a tight time limit, I'd love to get into the details of this with you. So whether you're an IKEA shopper who's shopping in IKEAs, or whether you are an Amazon employee in the United States or China, or whether you are an employee of HSBC Bank, you might come to Count Us In through different portals. And what we're suggesting now is that actually museums join together and say, the time is now. We cannot wait. We know what science says needs to happen for people to take action to protect our planet and to begin to lead more sustainable lives across all of the sustainable development agenda, not just climate. How can we band together in showing what the science says to our audiences in ways that are authentic, branded as our own individual institutions, and yet coming together to demonstrate the importance and the efficacy and the accountability of us as museums, that we're standing up in this critical moment of our time. So our invitation to you is to join us in this journey. We have a few leading museums who've already taken the step in, and we'll be announcing that. We want all of us together, and I don't say all of you, all of us together, so that we can launch a Count Us In page that could have a page for you, that could have standing exhibitions for you that are branded as your institution, but that add up to something bigger, so that we can demonstrate together with corporations and conservation organizations and you name it, that we are part of the ecosystem of organizations that realize that time is of the essence, that business as usual cannot happen anymore. We cannot wait anymore. The time is now. And so with that, I would just say, join us. It's a wild experiment. We're being deliberately experimental, and we know the best way to learn is to learn together. So thank you for inviting me to join you today. I hope to get to know many of you. And with that, I'll leave it. Sorry about the glitch in the beginning with my microphone. I'm sometimes bad at technology.
Thank you so much, Molly. It was a wonderful speech. Now we have another colleague. Vamos ter então.
We are going to have Daniel Castro, representative of IBER Museums. Del Castro Benitez is director of the National Museum of Colombia and represents Colombia in the Intergovernmental Committee of IBER Museums. As you know, is an important organization of Latin America in the area of museums. He worked in the educational and cultural area of the National Museum of Colombia and was also the coordinator for Latin America and Caribbean in the educational and cultural action of ICOV between 2004 and 2009. Welcome, Daniel Castro.
For the invitation, I'd like to see if you're hearing me. It's okay? Okay, fine. Thank you for the invitation on behalf of the IBER Museums program. I'm very proud to be the voice of this program in this presentation and in this conference. I like to thank the technicians and especially Monica Barcelos, who helped me with the final details of this presentation. Molly says the time is now as agents of change. And the title I decided is "The Future is Always Today," or "The Future is Today." And then I will explain what is the meaning of that. I have 4 moments in this talk. One short forward, then try to explain you how was the philosophy of this program, how was the origin of that, and then how we developed the standards, and then how we assure that we transfer these standards and this philosophy. Sometimes, and actually now, we talk about social responsibility, and we take for granted, and we always think that it's an issue that is always with us, but there was not always with us. And sometimes I think it's 3 possibilities to understand that sort of concepts. First, with or through a codes of ethics. For example, it was says ICOM or UK museums when they define a code of ethics to work with. Second field is all these quality standards that are created through these international organizations of qualification of processes. And the third are good practices. And one example of this is what the American Association of Museums say about what a good practice is. So I choose this third one to explain what Ibermuseos is and what does. What is a good practice? Actually, are remarkable concepts or ideas or philosophies that show and prove identification with a group of standards and try to give solution to specific problems through transference. So we see 3 elements: remarkable concepts, the possibility to create one standard, and then the option that we transfer these ideas and widespread this vision and these concepts. So the second moment is, where was the origin of this and the philosophy of this program, this important program that unites a lot of countries of Iberoamerica. The first thing was the Round Table of Santiago de Chile. It was in 1972. And there was a meeting that was promoted by the UNESCO and at the same time as the ICOM, and invited many professionals, but not only museologists, but people of different disciplines, to reflect about the reality and the present and future of museums in 1972. The second platform was the Chiefs of State Summit that gave form to the Ibero-American cultural space, and it was in Montevideo in 2006. And the third moment was the creation, indeed, of Ibermuseums program in Salvador de Bahia in 2007. So I think it's important, and when we say the time is now, or the future is now, sometimes we need to see in history and to revise what was the origin of these processes. Through this philosophy of the program, there was one core idea, especially in the Round Table of Santiago de Chile. The first one, what was very visionary actually, was that the museum is and was an integral environment. And the second, that the museum is be to recognize as the place of action. Maybe now we think that is normal, that we take for granted. But actually, in this moment, these ideas were really very radical in the most positive way. And through this idea, we need to remember that ICOM adopted this idea of social responsibility in their own definition. And it was through the spirit of what the people in Santiago de Chile really thought and made through a declaration. And the second idea was that the Ibero-American Cultural Space and the Ibero-Museum's core ideas took the spirit, took the inspiration of the Round Table of Santiago de Chile in 1972. And we can summarize two main ideas. Protect and recognize the cultural heritage, the conservation, social appropriation through social valorization and community participation. There is an element of social responsibility in the core and in the essence of this program. And the second thing is the social and educative role of museums as agents of change and development. So when we try to do something, I think we never need to forget what are the platform and the philosophy and the essence of the thing that we do. From the beginning, this is one picture of the first conference. You see diversity, you see participation, you see all the countries together trying to sharing their own ideas about what we like to do. Now, the third part of this talk is how we identify the standards, and I took from the 13 lines of action, the guidelines, I choose a group of them where I like to prove how this idea of social responsibility are inside these aims that Ibero-Museums like to do and like to share. First of all, the idea of understanding culture as a symbolic value. This is something that it's very important because that it's included with these ideas of the integral and sustainable development. Second point is promotion of intercultural dialogue. Always this idea of participation, of try to exchange experiences, ideas, even problems, but really try to give a common platform for do that. Third is to introduce this very important element of memory and try to put it into strategical social practices for the development of our countries. This is an image that really tried to summarize one of these ideas. You know that maybe one image is more powerful than 1,000 words, and you see here this idea of integration. There's another idea is try to identify museums as territories for safeguarding and diffusion of democratic and citizenship values. Other idea is try to give to grand groups and social movements this idea, the right to memory, and support actions for social appropriation of heritage. Understand the museological processes as an exercise of interpreting the world, which enables social subjects to interpret and transform reality, not museological in a very aseptic way, but in a very living manner to develop our ideas and our projects. To recognize the value and diversity of cultural heritage of native people, Afro-descendants, migrant, immigrant populations, about or according to the specificity, and aiming to ensure the full participation in all levels of citizen life. In one word, is to enhance this idea of democratization and to be relevant to these groups, and that these groups are relevant to our institutions. Once again, this very powerful image of these people that are part of the museums, are taking part in the decisions of what we're trying to do. From this strategic plan of IBER museums, because when we define the standards, of course, we need to be careful that these platforms are clear and that the ideas are very well conceived. So we have three very important strategic objectives. One, protection of the museological heritage of the region. Second, look to strengthen the social function of our museums. And the third, qualify all the processes of operation, management, and planning of our institution. I like that because in the middle of these three, we always have in mind this idea of the social function of our museums, the people, and the citizens. So the 4th point is, if we have a philosophy, if we have a standards, then we need to transfer and to assure that the broader group of people, the broader group of institutions really try to not only understand, but to give and put in practice all these ideas. How we did it. I like that you see actually what we did. Maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago when we graded a good job for one design studio in Brazil that redeveloped the image of IBER museums. And so I like to show you and that you stress on the logo of every one of these possibilities of transfers. First, heritage protection. There's a fund, and of course that helps the institutions and the groups and the people really to protect the heritage in very different levels and ways. The second, it's an Ibero-American Prize for Museums. So when we identify and we invite to identify the very remarkable projects. And of course, these projects have to have these 3 elements. That what is the philosophy that is behind what we do? Second, what is the standard that we're trying to implement? And third, what is the possibilities of transference and of identification and involucration of the groups we're working with? Of course, these projects need to recognize diversity, integration, minorities, and so on. The meetings and the cooperative gatherings and looked again, and the logo try to reunite all of the persons that are part of the program, all the countries that are part of the program, to share what I said, the initiatives, the ideas, the problems, and try to be how we together try to solve that sort of problems that sometimes are many of the all-day life activities that we do in our institutions. Formal gatherings, of course, but at the same time, training and grants that try to unite groups of people in the possibility of their interests, and of course to enhance this idea through grants and money. There's many different options. Try to understand at the same time how are the reality of our countries, how is the reality of our communities, and try to put an idea together and try to share all these needs that we have and we need to solve. Sustainability, of course, now we talk about sustainability, but there are a lot of things that are important for IBER museums. The idea of peace, justice, innovation, quality education, gender equality, try to reduce inequalities, try to promote fair societies. This is an idea that came from these main aims of the Roundtable of Santiago and, of course, of the Declaration of IBER Museums of Salvador de Bahia. The Observatory, a platform where we can share all what we do. Of course, measuring, making statistics, try to see how is the reality up to date and try to look for new possibilities. This is a platform that we can browse in the webpage of IBER Museums. And we come for the conclusion. As Molly says, the time is now for IBER Museums. The future is always today. Look how in one moment, 1972, a group of people thought about the present and the future of the museums. Then in 2007, the group that give form to IBER Museums thought about the present and the future of the museums. I think that for the program, the future is always today, because these ideas were inspiration to try to identify integral museums with a big concern to social responsibility, always very attentive to the needs of our communities as places of action and participation. And this image to end my talk, maybe you have heard that William Wordsworth say that the one child is the future of the man. So we think that we work for that, not only for children, of course, but for all the citizenship, for the future citizens. And then this is what we do, and we see this is what we like to transfer and we like to share. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Daniel Castro.
Thank you, Daniel Castro. Let's continue our panel, and now with Inês Câmara, and I'll introduce her very briefly. She's connected to the creation of the map of ideas created with Fernambuco and Daniela Araújo in 1999. Very well-known company in the cultural universe in Portugal, which invests in a different approach, transdisciplinary in the area of culture, heritage, and also values of citizenship. Besides the activities of this company, the Map of Ideas, Inês Câmara is also a member of the board of Culture Action Europe and president of the Reserve Association centered on global citizenship and development. And I invite you to give us your presentation, 15 minutes, please, which will close this block, and then we will have a debate. Thank you, José Alberto. I'd like to say thank you for today's invitation and everybody who is following us here at this conference, which has been very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about this experience of being European and talk about one of our projects, and also speak about the title of this paper. I have this bad habit of using the titles of communications and papers like a dare challenge. In other words, when I'm invited, I launch the title, and I always have some kind of confidence that then that nebulous idea, that fuzzy idea that sustains the title will give rise to a presentation or paper, something with more substance. In other words, deep down, it has a lot to do with this security of knowing that sooner or later there will be connections. On the other hand, I always need a narrative, the guiding line in terms of my line of thought, so something that will make the connection and which makes communications to function in terms of ideas. The first time I heard about network, a little bit to do with our panel today. The first time I heard about networks, which had to do with a book by John Nesbitt in 1982 that spoke about megatrends, which said that the future of our society would be a work in a network. And that had a lot of resonance in the way that I saw the way we worked. And it was a bit like the network being equivalent to solidarity and new ways of, new forms of solidarity and support of work. This is from 1982. So regardless of my age today, I was very young when I got that book, but I read it at a time in which there's also another book by Antonio Damasio on the Descartes mistake, and that book spoke about this connection between reason and emotion, and Damasio spoke about the fact that there can be no reason without emotion. And once again, for me, it made a lot of sense from the point of view of the connection of networks. I could tell you about more references, but this is the idea of networks that are social networks, but also neuron networks. And now let me take this opportunity to read a quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson. It is from a book that already comes from the second series of Cosmos from 2014. And the episode is Cosmic Poetry, which has to do with what we are doing here at the museums. I'm going to read this quote because I think it's easier, because he deserves this. In this description, Neil deGrasse Tyson, in this episode, he says, the most impressive fact is that to acknowledge that atoms that comprise life on Earth, the atoms that form human life, go back to the massive star nuclei with extreme temperatures and pressures, and the biggest of them collapsed and exploded by spreading their innards. They were chemically enriched throughout the galaxy. The innards comprising carbon and nitrogen, oxygen, and all the fundamental ingredients for life that were condensed in gas clouds, forming the chemistry of life. We're all connected biologically, one to others, to Earth chemically. So we have this connection, and after all, it is what we all want in life, to be integrated, to feel part of what happens around them. And to conclude, what I mean is that we're connected since the stars, and this individual and collective intelligence results from this alliance between reason and emotion. And also believe that we must have the courage and capacity to trust others. It's part of this logic of network. This quicksand fundamentals talk to us about us avoiding the uncertainty of risk, but also after post-industrial society of knowledge, the forms of organization, knowledge and work that are based on networks. The fact that we work in a more diverse way makes our organizations be resilient. That's why the scientific method, and this is based in a logic of networking and spreading and confrontation of ideas. Steven Weinberg, In a book that's quite recent, he gives a beautiful explanation regarding science. We've learned how to do science without knowledge, without rules, not only how to do science, but the experience of science. And this is by the pleasure that we get when you are able to explain something. This always implies explaining something about somebody, an article, conference like us, or a breakfast conversation with a family member, and is unaware. This is always done by sharing in the map of ideas that are created in 1999 with Anna and Daniela, and the networks must be redone. Daniela left a little while, but she's always been present in our history. We've always worked in a network, we've always had a relatively small structure supported by a network of partners that have other partners and skills and other looks. And this means that I can add this idea of networks, an idea that has to do with diversity. In 2010, when this big friend of ours spoke about Go European, and who said we should do work at European level, the incentive that he used and explained right away, he was very clear that working at the European level is not a financial bet, but an opportunity to learn permanently. And in projects with EU financing, the first exercise is network. And diversity is one of the criteria that are most valued in different areas, public and private, different sizes, different stories, different geographies. And I must say that after more than a decade later, and here in this room right now, almost 11 years have gone by since that afternoon spent with Joaquin to explain this potential of thinking about Europe in this conference. And time flies very quickly, especially when we are happy with our work. So let me add this vocab. I've spoken about network resilience, diversity, but today we're also talking about a crisis. And in our sector, we're going through one of the biggest crises ever. And organizations that work in networking are more efficient and resilient. And this resilience is based on the diversity of these looks and the openness to others. Last week, a friend and colleague said, who was horrified, another one was horrified, we have to talk about executions and not institutions. To try and highlight the dimension with institutions and structures, we have to start working towards the outside more. This leads us to the black elephant in the room. This is an Aaron Swiden concept, and it's a hybrid between the black swan from Taylor, abrupt and unpredictable event. And just a side remark, Taylor says that COVID was not an abrupt and unpredictable event, something I find curious, and the elephant in the room. A subject that nobody talks about, and it's obvious, and it's never debated for several reasons, almost like a taboo. So the black elephant has these characteristics, and if there's something that this crisis showed was the labor and the financial fragility of our sector. For decades, we were in a technocratic way with super institutions culturally, and there's super managers, these super programmers, defined policies of taste, and they chop and change as they wish. And with this crisis, this black elephant, this destroyed this myth. And going back to a classic time of economy, we fundamentally have mega institutions like the VNA and others living through a positive externality economically, and the collateral effects of a decision compared to others that didn't participate. And in this case, our externality was tourism, and its sudden disappearance of this flow that will come back, obviously, made evident that what happened was not a management of excellence, because a charismatic leader, at the end of the day, is only that, one person, but rather just a lot of invoicing. We discovered isolated organizations in the desert without a network. And just to give you an idea of this isolation, let me quote Tavares and steal his citation. I'm going to read this quotation. I accept seeing what the group sees. We could summarize, my eyes are collective. We are before collective vision, as if we were looking at the world not through our eyes, but through the city, connections with others, and our way of seeing the world. And then he has a very good relationship, which has to do with how feeling. A smile or a laugh is always a group laugh. And by quoting books, and those who survive through this storm work in a network. We have survived through the European dimension, not through the financial dimension, but we have several supporting structures and that we have the pleasure of being part of in a common vision and enormous knowledge and diversity. We have survived through resilience, and the image that comes to my mind is like we being the system of the Pombaline cages, bird cages, this anti-seismic construction after the 1755 earthquake, in which we shook, but the logic of the structure as a whole keeps us standing upright. And besides that, bringing one more animal to our story, we have the ambition of creating unicorns. In other words, the idea is thinking about unicorns in the sense of thinking of projects, causes, organizations that make us dream, run risks, and that would be usually absurd and implausible, but in fact that in our world of culture, it's very often those projects, causes, and organizations that bring us enormous value. From my point of view, and always quoting Stephen Weil, which is kind of my mantra, from being about something to being for somebody. In my experience, these unicorns, very often they have a romance with the so-called black elephants. These organizations that are integrated network, open to others, creative, dedicated to experimentation, prepared to run risks and learn with them. This expression, be prepared to make mistakes, it's like the DNA of organizations. When Adeste Plus started, we couldn't imagine the pandemic and this generation of several European projects. This Adeste is the capacity of adaptation, the collective strength, and the capacity to learn through mistakes. In the case of Adeste, with the mediators, we gave a lot of focus to the professional, but we very quickly realized that as an isolated professional, they have very little possibility of influencing an organization. That's why this Plus is based on a very broad network of partners in which are very courageous with territories in mutation and change. In Portugal, we're very lucky to work with the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation, and our methodology is internal in terms of relationship, but we also have a network of solidarity based on the emotional part through action learning and buddy program, always in networking. As you can imagine, a project based on publics of culture could have had a sudden death with this crisis and the onset of the crisis, but such didn't happen. Last year, 2020, we involved more than 350 professionals in events of this project, and this year we are developing projects of extending training and the conferences themselves. This involves 15 institutions from Portugal to Denmark that were shaken by layoff, Brexit, etc. But this solidarity, and let me reinforce the emotional part, this knowledge allowed us to keep our eyes on the horizon, debate and discuss this black elephant as an object of fascination and not fear. This is the strength of networking. This ethic also has to do with the way we change and we do consulting. If you think about a network, a living ecosystem based on cultural knowledge and democracy, we have a new model. In the methodology itself, it's like incorporating all the concepts of cultural democracy in the methodology of work and acknowledge the intelligence of the institution as a collective. And this is a very important part of our work. Whether in innovation process and the creation of risk spaces experience, the error must be part of our possibility of life. In the case of Adeste Plus, we created a model of thinking and assess public strategies with the influence in organizations being tested in 7 European countries of different vocation, sectors, and scale. And it's somewhat this idea that Garcia mentions when he talks about power and collective intelligence for democracy. In other words, the fact that when we work in a network and work together, we contribute towards a better world, in fact. And for me, and in a way, this is what happens in museums as public spaces of knowledge, because museums are institutions in which what is of interest and the explicit vocation. This collective intelligence, more than the curators or the researchers, but also the public, people who frequent them, people who use them. So it makes all the sense to think that about this idea of intelligence and collective network as a very important part of our work in museums. I would like to share a video on the ADEST project and the work. It's a 3-minute video. Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much.
Do you want to know what ADEST Plus is about? Why do we feel there is a need for the ADEST Plus project? Culture is not accessible enough, and cultural participation is a major challenge for Europe. Many claim the need for change, but how do we do that? How should we take responsibility and open up cultural organisations to new relations with citizens and communities? Firstly, we believe that changing the way we address cultural participation is a complex challenge, and complex challenges demand multiple perspectives. That is why the consortium is made up of artistic partners who take risks and try to test something new that might change them, and policy partners, which explore the policy frames that can help organisations to become more audience-centred. And finally, research partners, because change needs investigation and modelling to become replicable. But how do we do it? We research and ideate a methodology, the audience-centred experience design, to support cultural organisations. Then we run a set of workshops with the staff of our artistic partners to see if it works. After the capacity building based on this process, organisations prototype new creative programmes that they test with their audiences. Once tested, the capacity building becomes what we call a blueprint, a step-by-step methodology that others could apply. But does it work for others? To improve this blueprint, we test it on other cultural contexts. Finally, we share our learning with as many people as possible through conferences and summer schools. Now the blueprint belongs to everybody, but it is just a seed. It can grow and develop in diverse plants thanks to the contributions of others. Join us to discover and learn the ADEST Plus audience-centred experience design blueprint to help cultural organisations create new relations with citizens and community.
Thank you, Inês, for your presentation. Before going to the debate, I would just like to launch some topics that I picked up from the several communications that we had throughout this block, and that are very interesting because they launch several issues related with what we are talking about, networking and participation, and they touch upon several aspects that seem interesting because that touches upon some of the issues that our listeners and participants online sent, and that I'd like to place to some of you. Regarding Hugo Seabra, this question of the civil role of ours, the art and culture and networking, where artists and non-artists and non-professionals work together, and having artistic and non-artistic institutions working with art within a very specific institution, which is the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation in our country. Molly Fannon, in a vision where she repeated inspire quite often, the values of the United Nations, which in fact are the values that are transverse to what everybody mentioned here, but that we needed to change mentalities. We needed to reach through the public with music, the question of biodiversity, the question of faith and beliefs, children, and conversations on the climate, and the impact that the cultural sector has on our society, and the role that museums have within society through the impact that they can provoke. I'm going to read in English a very strong sentence.
Museums as agents of change. Achei extremamente interessante.
This is very interesting. Daniel Castro also spoke about the future is today, the question of social responsibility, codes of ethics, once again, human values, the quality of good practices. Identify a group, the solution for that very group by working together, and giving examples of several declarations like the one of Santiago de Chile and Salvador de Bahia, very much aimed towards the environmental issues and the question of biodiversity and working together with nature and local communities. And a very important question, which has been very recent debate internationally, which are museums as places of democracy and values of citizenship, and the importance of training within these areas. Ines Kamara also mentioned in a very poetic way the question of mediation and sharing, side by side, always the question of networks, and these networks as a solution to work on diversity and helping on diversity, this work that helped in many cases for those who work in networking for this particular moment that we're going through worldwide of great resilience and great diversity, the causes to experience this in network and change, not being afraid of change and experimenting the force and strength of work in a network in a democratic way once again, and this collective intelligence of working together within this network, almost like the philosophy of a map of ideas with a holistic vision that seems to be very interesting. Let me start by launching a question or the debate actually regarding this idea that working in a territory, the ways of working always with the communities of certain territories. Let me also take the opportunity to inform that we're not going to have for the debate Molly Fannon. Unfortunately, she cannot be present. She couldn't stay for this part of our debate. But let me start with a question that came, but for everybody, from a participant, Antonio Ramalho, and who places the following question. This is for everybody, generally. As a sociologist from Caritas, I work on the dimension of social inclusion of the weaker groups by using culture, art, and artistic expressions as a tool of human promotion and social development. I'd like to know which projects and plans for support for the current year. So I don't know if you can tell me. Now that I read the whole question, I don't know if we can say what projects of support as a result for your work, but I would say that I can pass the floor, and this is somewhat, I could start with the word with you, Hugo, about what Gulbenkian and the work you've done with Gulbenkian has done in terms of inclusion. In this specific case by working with Gulbenkian, and who knows with this sociologist of Caritas can work with your work. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope that the sound now is better because I had a challenge with the sound. In fact, according to the territories, I hope that Mr. Ramalho is located in Portugal, because we have been some of the promoters of these projects. According to Italy, we saw the logo of a company, a São Paulo foundation in Italy, which has taken part in these meetings. For instance, in the Netherlands, there is a foundation. In Spain, in addition to the La Caixa Foundation, we have Daniel Carasu Foundation. In France also, another foundation models with approaches to these themes and potential fundings. In the case of Carlos Gulbenkian and Foundation, they give support for 24 to 36 months, but it's not possible to apply every year. This year we have a number of projects going on for the next 2 years, and meanwhile they may probably open a tender for Caritas or other entities. A subject which was discussed by several participants. There is an extraordinary potential with many types of communities with potential in several themes that they can bring for this provocation that artistic practices can do to societies. I could hear from different members in the panel other opportunities in which the museums could have a core role. There is a second question which arrived and which launched, and I addressed this question to everyone. We will start now with Daniel Castro. How to value the location and stimulate socialization on with all the differences within the scope of a global museum. I think, according to the experiences of the IBA museums, there is this experience, this sensitivity of working with differences. And this was really emphasized in Daniel Castro's presentation. Would you like to do any comment to this issue or to this question, please?
This one interesting idea that maybe has to do with the origin of museums. Sometimes we forget that the origin, as we said, Greece, the Muses, one temple. Sometimes we forget that there is some sort of research that say that the Museion was not a place in itself, I mean like a building, but it was all the hills that were around the Helicon mountain. So that the origin of the museum was the nature itself. And with this, that comes some sort of integrity. And then, of course, there comes the specialization, disciplines, this idea of try to part elements in these places. But if we really give again this idea of this origin, I'm really very obsessive with the point of departure, with the point of origin, where you can share with the people, with the individuals, with the communities, this idea of integrity of an institution, even if there is only an institution devoted to art, to history, to ethnography, to archaeology, to bring again this idea of an integral and holistic way of understand and experience what the humankind did. I think that brings a lot of possibilities to break these barriers that sometimes we find when people say, well, maybe a museum is not something for me. Maybe the museum is an institution that is not related to me. And sometimes in a way, when you see tiny communities, institutions, people that were not educated in that sort of recognizing that sort of tools. So I think what Ibermuseos try to do is really try to give again these possibilities with this sense, with this idea, with this inspiration of places that are the most integral you can do. And sometimes that you see the effect with the communities and with the people when they see that they're really looking into them as they are themselves, because a human being is an integral entity too, and it's something that we need to recover, that we need to put again on the table and try to work with.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. I will now raise a question to Inês Câmara, and I will read the question from Edi Shambin that says, a question: who could annul this meaning of network almost imposed by big institutions, and how small networks can impose themselves, which always existed in the small communities? And given this hegemony of answers of super networks, we see the voices and hear the voices of those who are marginalized culturally. It's more a statement, not rather a question. I was listening to Seabra and Daniel speaking about this crossing. This panel was very funny because we were crossing several levels of intervention in the networks. But what is really interesting here and answers this statement, there is a permanent and ongoing exercise between the role of the institutions and the museums are an institution in a full meaning of the word, the functions with the structure and the historic weight, the agency of the individual. These projects that were mentioned today, all of them reinforce this idea of the agency of the individual, how voluntarily, quite often in our lives, in our work, in our life in society, we accept ourselves to be dismissed from our duties by the institutions. But those who belong to the networks are those who do the work. There are networks made by big institutions. Sometimes there is a very small network that is really entrepreneur. Even when Molly was speaking about the Global Museum, the partners about whom she was talking about were these organizations that undertake this agency. It's not a story of the size, of the dimension. Is how can we all contribute as individuals to society? How can we undertake our duty, our mission, and how do we run risks? And this is fundamental. Thank you. Well, I think it was an excellent answer because, in fact, these small networks, then make up bigger and bigger networks, and they will fulfill the big net, as we saw from the excellent examples mentioned in the papers presented, with the social responsibility, the valorization of the individual, and the valorization of the authenticity of each culture, of each people, with democracy and freedom. Not only I don't have more time to present more questions or encouragement sentences that were sent by our participants, but above all, I can tell you that most of them are to greet the work that you develop as a network and that have a common word that I realized a while ago, inspiration, and to involve the communities. Thank you very much to all of you.
Good afternoon. Let's talk about networks, and to talk about them, let's go back to an extraordinary text of Father Antonio Vieira dated 1655. He said that Christ made of the apostles fishermen of men. He said that the nets with them, there is not because they used, because what they used, and not because the work cost them, but their work cost a lot, and thereby they were theirs. So these fishing nets were theirs, and made by hands. You could fish and you cannot fish men. But from this fishery of understanding, only those who know how to make the nets know how to launch them and how the mesh is comprised. If you don't even know that, how do you make the net? And if you don't know how to make the knots, how should you know how to fish men? Let's talk about these networks of museums. As Father Antonio Vieira said, these are networks of understandings because they exist, because they were made, and they cost work, networks and nets that were made to fish men and serve the community they are inserted in, and all those who visit them. In this round table, we will bring to the table only 3 examples of nets. And we know of many other examples that exist throughout the country. The first example we'll be talking about, the Portuguese network of museums, was created in the year 2000 and integrates the General Directorate of Cultural Heritage, Ministry of Culture, and aggregates museums from different tutelages on this network. Rita Geronima is the Deputy Director for the area of museums, palaces, and monuments. The second example is the network of museums of Vila Nova Famalicão that came to light in 2012 and is coordinated by the municipality of Vila Nova Famalicão. On this network, we will be hearing from Jacob, a museologist and member of the coordinating team of this municipal network. The third and last example is the Middeltegers Museums, established in 2018 within the municipality. And Margarita Blade will be talking to us about that, the director of the Cultural Age Museum and member of this intermunicipal network. My first question will be for Rita Geronimo, and let me ask her to talk to tell us about how the Director General understands this Portuguese network of museums. Good afternoon. Let me start by thanking my colleagues at the table for having accepted the invitation to be present here, and Isabel for the moderation, Margarita and Mariana for bringing us the experiences as a network of museums. In 2020, the Portuguese network of museums turned 20. We must remember that creating a network of museums corresponds to the same dissemination of knowledge, the promotion of values of inclusion, among other roles that combine for the importance of the museums in Portugal. Even though we are going through the pandemic, we weren't able to accomplish the program for the Portuguese network of museums, and is a reflection and launching of the network as a platform of debate to promote the dynamics of field work and technical support. The action plan that we have laid out for 2021 reflects the serious commitment that this direction has taken on in reinforcing the role of RPM. It is this program that we've laid out for 2021 in terms of measures that aim for the repositioning of the museum network, not only in the qualification of the integrated museums, but also in dissemination, sharing of information, and strengthening of networking. This is what we want with this initiative. The program of museum support, financial support, whose goal it is to qualify the Portuguese museums and contribute towards the preservation of cultural heritage and improve public service. That was precisely yesterday. We saw the publication of the opening of this program to the value of €1 million, and this is dedicated to financing projects of the network museums to support the sustainability and functioning and capturing public in post-COVID situations. It integrates a program from the Ministry of Culture and the preference areas of partnerships, digital transformation study and exhibitions, dissemination and mediation, and education. So this is an area where the network acts. Another one is accreditation, and we foresee the integration of new museums, training also for 2021 with digital and in-person sessions. The latter, of course, dependent on the evolution of the pandemic and the topics of the training actions of the network also reflect what we are going through, and many of them dedicated to the digital transformation and the way these museums relate with the public. In terms of communication, DGPC, together with Palaces and Monuments, is also working to promote a more accessible set of initiatives and actions. So in line with the technical financial actions, the GPC through the network is committed to promote a facilitating role and supporting the cooperation between museological institutions where we have territorial networks and topics of museums that we'll talk about this session. I'd also like to highlight that for this year we have foreseen the national meeting under the topic working in a network. So we reflect on the future of the museum network and mechanisms of participative action and debate around the role of the network and its area of intervention. To end off, let me talk about the RPM platform. that we have started working on and will be implemented in 2022 that also comprise an important tool of sharing information, report, reception, contribution, dissemination of initiatives, so which is fundamental for this work in a network. So we have a lot of news and many things happening in the museum networks, and we are very much committed for the network to have its place in the museological plan. So thank you very much. And now we're going from national network to a very good example of a municipal network. Let me pass the floor to Mariana Jacob. And let me ask you to be very brief because we have limited time. What is the museum network of Vila Nova de Famalicão?
I greet the table and all the attendees online. It is a privilege to represent the network of museums of Vila Nova de Famalicão, and I greet the table and all those present who are online with us. I would like to say who we are. Our network is composed of 10 museums and 2 visible collections located in the municipality of Vila Nova de Famalicão, with different departments, municipal, foundations, associations, parishes. Out of this universe, 3 are part of the Portuguese network of museums, 2 are in the process of preparing applications, and the others follow the examples of good practices of accredited museums, working daily to gather conditions for future certification. I believe that many of those who are listening to us will know some of these museums, that they may keep them as places of active learning, citizenship, entertainment, and memory. And I ask, who has in their childhood memories the mandatory visit to the Camila's House Museum and the Study Center, the oldest house museum in Portugal? Who has heard the machines at work in the textile industry museum of the Ave Basin and its deafening noise? Who has been touched by the stories told by those who lived and felt the first person lived the colonial war? Who has discovered in Bernardino Machado Museum the different facets revealed in the 2 mandates and life of this president of the Portuguese of the Republic? Who is passionate about trains? Certainly, you know the center in Lousado of the National Railway Museum. Have you experienced our Famalicão industrial tourism route? So you have had the opportunity to know our automobile museum. These are 7 of our members, but the other ones have also curious facts. At the Soledad Malvar House Museum, we find correspondence of the collector and antique dealer with José Régio. At the Castro Alves Foundation, we highlight the museum building and its museological project by the architect Fernando Lanhas. In the Museum of Art Sacra in Lapa, we find the tombstone of Francisco Inácio Tinoco de Souza, a Brazilian from the return team. In the Museum of Confraria da Senhora do Carmo, you can marvel at the silver offerings of Brazilian brothers. We feel the experiences of the community. Now that you know or you have remembered who we are, I will briefly speak about how we get together as a network. This goes back to 2009, when in a plenary meeting with all the responsible for the existing museums or in the process of being created, it was decided to move forward with the creation of the Municipal Museological Network. A working group was then appointed responsible for developing an action plan and organizing a joint program to celebrate the International Museum Day of that year. Among the actions of this working group was the implementation of a survey to diagnose the status of each museum unit. The results of this survey led to the conclusion, and I quote, "What we call the museum network is a diversified cultural and heritage reality which gives enormous richness and unexplored potential. However, it is unequal and unbalanced, which makes it fragile and requires requalification and improvement efforts." In 2011, a museum network territory identity heritage seminar with the support of the Faculty of Arts of the University of Porto, with the aim of bringing to Portugal the contribution of experts in the themes areas of museums, museum functions and networking methodologies of national and local scope. This seminar was crucial to think our network of museums and inspire during the following year its creation with the signing of a Declaration of Principles. We are almost celebrating 10 years of existence of this network, and our dream, our vision is to be a foundation for the action of museums, promoting partners, sharing and synergies between museum, people, and territory. Thank you very much. Now I will pass on the floor to Margarida Moleiro to speak about the Middle Tagus Museum, a young network with a long work, of which Margarida is going to tell us. I greet the audience, everyone present, and I thank on behalf of the Middle Tagus Museum for this initiative and the opportunity. In September 2017, the Intermunicipal Council of Medium Tagus approved the constitution of a working group to be composed of the heads of the museums or museum nuclei of this region, aiming to establish an effective articulation between all museum stakeholders to foster strategy for the integrated dynamization of the museums and to enable the gradual accreditation of these spaces. To start this work, CIM considered it essential to establish a partnership with the higher education institutions based in this territory. And so the Middle Tagus Museum Network was created in June 2018 by protocol established between the intermunicipal community of Medium Tagus and the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar. In this protocol, were established the partners and also the objectives of the networks. This network covers the 3,344 square kilometers constitute an area, the area of Medium Tagus, with 13 square meters of entroncamento and 714 square meters of a branch, an area where about 247,000 people live. The museum network of the Middle Tagus includes museological centers of Abrantes, Alcanena, Constância, Mação, Entroncamento, Orém, Sardual, Sertã, Tomar, Torres Novas, Vila do Rei, and Vila Nova da Barquinha. As we could see in the diagnosis that we have carried out during the first year of our network's activity, there were 67 museums, heritage sites, and visitable collections, some of them unactivated. Out of the total, only 6 museums integrate the Portuguese network of museums: Museum of Aguarela Roque Gameiro, Museum National Railway, Museum of Art and Prehistory, the Saga Art Museum, and Carlos Reis Municipal Museum. The museums of this network reveal a great diversity in motivations, in causes of origin, mission, a diverse type of collections, themes, as well as strategies and forms of communication, which are quite different. And if there are museums under the tutelage of municipalities, private museums such as foundations, associations, or cooperatives, museums of parish councils, and there is even one museum that is under the tutelage of a municipal and the owner of a collection. Therefore, public and private eco-museums, art museums, house museums, science museums, ethnographic museums, military museums, and the museums of techniques and materials. Everyone now is willing to go from Famalicão, traveling through Middle Tagus and visiting all the museums. Now we will continue with the questions to Rita Geronimo. That has to do with the recent report prepared by the project group of the future. Refoundation of the network is the purpose, based on 5 action lines: to know, to assess, to structure, to unite, and to program or to schedule. Do you agree of what the report says? Are you going to put in place what they propose? To me, it was an honor to be part of this group of projects that prepared this report and to have participated in the reflections. They were very, very interesting. It will be a learning experience I will always remember. I recommend the Portuguese network of strong acting network of museums, strengthening of networking, establishment of networks. How not to agree? It's everything we want. I will work to achieve these outcomes. As mentioned by the Secretary of State, there is an evaluation being done in our General Directorate, which we will prepare a strategic plan to museums, which we will disclose very briefly. The network of museums will have a key role, but some of the measures that are included in this report from the project group, namely in the area of networks and partnerships, which are being put in place right now, creation of the portal of the network of museums I have mentioned, the resume of the annual meetings, I don't know when, but we will continue, and I underlined the cultural heritage program, which will be published briefly, which will meet one of the recommendations of the working of the project group to stimulate promotion of research and development activities in palaces and monuments in the General Directorate buildings. We are in the good path, and we will certainly have as a reference this report, which has been so important to us. Thank you. To us is always also very important to listen to this good news. Now I will pass on the floor again to Mariana. Mariana, the question is, what are the main action axes of the museum network of Vila Nova Famalicão? I will highlight some of the main axes of action of our network of museums. I start with to empower. We believe that the museums are made up of people and for people. For this reason, we are proud of a partnership we have with the Centro Qualifica of Vila Nova Famalicão, which enabled between 2018 and 2020 opportunities to validation recognition of professional skills and training, totalizing the certification of 18 professionals of our museums in 2 editions of this process, with a total of 200 hours of training in museology and foreign languages, French and English. Another axle to be emphasized is the union, to unite. We believe, as the Amor Eletro song says, that together we are stronger. Since 2016, annual meetings of the museum network have been held with an important focus on creating dynamics that foster networking and strengthen the sense of belonging of our members. One of our most relevant examples was the Be a Museum project guided by Professor Alice Medo, which resulted in the creation of a work methodology that was developed from November 2018 to November 2019, allowing for reflection on the role each museum plays, its mission, and the challenges they face in the territory where it is inserted. The result of this process was published in the book Defining the Mission from Necessity to Challenge, the first issue of the monographic collection of the Museum Network, Being and Doing Museums in the 21st Century, bilingual book and with clear language, adapted by Accesso Cultura, available free online. Finally, I emphasize the Axel 2 program. We believe that it's not the objects, but the mediation activities of a museum that define its relevance to society. I give you the example of the traveling exhibition with catalog networked museums of Vila Nova de Famalicão. Its author was the Cupertino de Miranda Foundation, and it involved all the other museums to create a networked, standardized product with accessible, attractive, and captivating information, publicizing the museums at municipal and national level, taking into account that the exhibition is composed of original images designed specifically for this project by national illustrators such as André Carrilho, Bárbara R., Cátia Vidinhas, Mariana A. Miserável, Tiago Manuel, among others. These are some of our access, some of our activities. But if you are interested in knowing more, I invite you to follow our Facebook page and the municipality website, where we include our working processes. Thank you, Mariana. It's true. I am a fan. I visit you quite often on Facebook. Now I will pass on the floor to Margarida. We get to know the museums of the Middle Tagus Museum. What are your axles of action? Thank you, Isabel. The museum network of the Middle Tagus, in the pursuit of its goals of territorial cohesion from the heritage and cultural elements, and aiming to weave a true museum network of cooperation and solidarity among professionals and institutions, has been working in three axes. First, to know the institutions, the way of working of each one, knowing the professionals, knowing the collections, the needs and strength of each museum unit, and how they can contribute to do this weaving the network. This axle includes the network we have been doing, production of instruments for the observation of practices and its analysis and evaluation, training and empowerment of teams. Axle 2 should be the priority, to reflect about the internal practices and the current museological practices and theories. In this axle, we include work at the level of debate among the members of the network, with the regular meetings with the working group, the creation of discussion forums with the community of museology professionals and others, as it is the case of the Middle Tagus annual meeting, and the implementation of the subgroup work within the network's sectorial groups divided by the areas inventory and research, conservation and safety, exhibition and interpretation, education and communication, to deepen the debate about each area, to improve knowledge and planning of actions in the field of museological functions. Third axle, to act, to plan joint or sectorial actions to meet needs which have already been identified by subgroups, or to plan desired actions to implement network activities in various methodological areas. We are currently preparing the 2021-2023 activity plan, including the joint exhibition, a strengthening of work at the communication level, and various actions in the methodological fields of education, conservation, safety, research, and inventory. I think those who are listening to us now know better this municipal network and this intermunicipal network. Now I will go back to Rita Geronimo to ask her how the GPC saw the consolidation of these networks in the territory. Have you been working with them? How can you support them?
Of territorial nature, which is automatic, created as from the regional directions and the intermunicipal communities or municipalities. And I have the pleasure of sharing the table with Margarida Moleiro and Mariana Jacob, who represent an intermunicipal network and a municipal network, and congratulate you once again for your presentations. Which were very interesting. And they bear witness to the work with a lot of merit that they have carried out in the territory and the importance they take on in the territories they are part of. These structures of work based on cooperation and solidarity gained a lot of expression over the last decades, as well as other networks within culture, theaters, libraries, archives, art centers, and DGPC considers that these structures have a fundamental role in the qualification of museums and what we've mentioned regarding the sharing of good practices regardless of their dimension, their typology, etc. They value the compliance of museologic policies, so we all stand to gain with these structures. Also in the area of training, which is fundamental, that was also mentioned here. The times are going through the scarcity of human resources and professionals with experience and qualifications. This is very important in terms of transmitting information and knowledge. And this is the true base of a network set up with the context of work involving museums with collections and areas of work of like nature. So the potential and benefits of working in a network are immense, and the GPC is aware of that optimization of synergies, resources of the museums, their specificities, the mitigation of cultural asymmetries, the construction and support of territorial cohesion, and the increase of cultural supply in terms of this diversity and specificity of each institution. We all stand to gain. Yes, I think so. And we hope that after this we have new networks flourishing, because we need them, and working in a network is always good to fish men, as Father Antonio Vieira said. Mariana, after speaking of museums that comprise the network of the municipality of Vila Nova de Famalicão, after having got to know the axes, which are the area of action, what are the difficulties that you feel? We cannot say that everything is good, because it never is in any case, and sometimes we feel these difficulties, but it's good that we can overcome them. So what are the difficulties of the network? Tell us. So our action plan for the coming biennial will be marked by a challenge, which is to celebrate in the territory our museums, to promote them, to focus on each one of our museologic units, and in the context where we celebrate 10 years of signing our principle of declarations of the museums within the network of Vila Nova de Famalicão. Within this period, we have the challenge of creating programming based on keywords of our vision, which are territories, museums and people, all of these words in the plural. Our goal is to program in a participated way, a big collaborative challenge, a diversity of actions that may transform this pandemic into an opportunity by giving focus to our museums and promote, which is also an enormous challenge, to promote cultural participation, understood as a way of reaching a greater involvement of people, groups and communities. With this programming, We very much want to contribute towards the reflection on the role of cultural institutions as facilitators and drivers of accomplishing the goals of sustainable development. And for this, we want to incentivize a more active involvement by our museums and contribute towards the promotion of adoption of values, behavior, and attitudes at a local level seek to respond to global problems. To build a more sustainable world is a responsibility that is shared, and in Vila Nova de Famalicão we want to take on as a challenge in a network. These are our desires for the coming biennial. For this, we believe undoubtedly that the coming years will be very important to continue consolidating this work in a network. We have the perspective that for this, this is necessary, and here we're trying to overcome our difficulties. We need to gain scale and critical mass, undoubtedly. We need to identify and share competences by creating working groups with specific topics and adapted to the real needs that our museums feel. We need to potentiate between our members connections that are free and more spontaneous, and for that we need to have a configuration based on more polycentric structures and less hierarchized. Very important as well will be to assess and monitor the functioning in a network and accept that a network is a structure in permanent construction, and whenever necessary it should be changed and rectified when the assessment and monetization indicates such action. So to function in full our network, we should develop in a deeper way the collaborative dimension, and this is essential when you talk about structures in a network. We would like to share that working truly in a network is very challenging, and this has been a path that has not always been easy to do. Nevertheless, these moments of joint construction, we consider that are very promising. And we believe in the value and potential of our network of museums because through our experience, networks live out of the work, the people that work in them, and they're feeling that they belong to a collective. That's why we are convinced that the big bet is and should always be on people. And let me end off by quoting Camille Castel Branco regarding this work in a network, and we can do this parallel. The prosperous days do not come by chance. They are gathered like the harvests with a lot of fatigue and many intervals of hopelessness. And we really believe in this museum network of Vila Nova de Famalicão. And we invite all participants to visit our territory and museologic units. Thank you very much. So, Mariana, I think these intervals of hopelessness have been very few. Margarida, I have the same question for you. We know the museums that comprise the Meditagas Museum Network. We know the axis, and now you're still quite young, but a lot of consistent work, which I admire. I really admire. I got to know in the preparation that we did for this debate. So what are the difficulties that you feel? Do you want to give us?
Yes, of course. I'm very pleased to share with you. We are still at the beginning. We still have to tell this pain. Having overcome a first moment of difficulty in which the network needed to leave an exclusive political administrative creation to the sphere of museum professionals and museum institutions, today the greatest difficulties are the resumption of the work of the partners outside the digital sphere and the reduced staff that each partner has in their structures. The truth is, for the consolidation of the network, the year 2020 was particularly difficult. We were at the beginning of our second year of work in a process of getting to know our partners. We were going to start the technical visits through the territory, which was cancelled due to the pandemic. Having to work for a year under these digital conditions at a time when people still barely knew each other, even more so in a year when we were required to complete formal network documents such as regulations, was challenging, difficult, and require partners to be very resilient for continuity. We are now finally preparing the meetings of the working subgroups and the possibility of reactivating the technical visits. The network is made up of representatives of the museum's units appointed by each municipalities. This implies that each house lends the network technicians who coordinate, regularly attend meetings, and maintain the network work. This is one of the weakest points. The lack of human resources in the staff of each institution directly compromises the work of the network, since the energy and availability that is required by members cannot overlap or compromise the commitment and quality of the activity they carry out at local level. What remains to be done? Facing this evidence, the territorial dimension and the number of museums present and their typological diversity, it seems to us that the creation of a managing body for this network concerned only with the management and coordination is already required. This is one of the points that needs to be reviewed in our network, and that is part of our tasks of the future. In fact, we feel like apprentices, beginners. We have many projects in the pipeline. We are aware there is still a lot to be done. Anyway, we consider, as Isabel said, that our pathway is already very interesting, and it is gratifying to look at the cloud of work jointly built by the members, that our partners were saying that they felt like this to be in a network. They felt as a community, inspiration, reflection, union, sharing, resilience, knowledge, mutual help, cooperation, professionalization, evolution, and creativity. And it is even better when we realize that the strengths that members identify in being in this network are precisely the sharing of technical and scientific information, the possibility of carrying out joint activities, the presence in a global and common strategy, the consolidation of cultural and tourist offer of a sub-region, and above all, the contact and cooperation among peers. For me, there is already a way to go, but there is still so much to do. As long as there is a road to walk, our network will not stop, and we will continue keeping going on. Thank you. 30 minutes have elapsed, so this roundtable ends about networks of museums in Portugal nationally, experiences and perspectives. We disclosed the Portuguese network of museums, an intermunicipal network, and Medium Tagus network, and the Vila Nova de Famalicão museum networks. Using the words of priest Antonio Vieira, we have been speaking about networks to fish men. I hope you have liked. I was asked to tell you, finally, that this digital conference ends now about social responsibility today, and tomorrow we will come back and we count on you with you online at 9:30. See you tomorrow.